Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Everybody, I hope you all are having beautiful starts to your summer. I last night met up with my friends in this women's circle that I'm a part of. We've been meeting for 4.5 years now, which is really special. And we meet once a month and we share about ourselves. And this time we met, one of my friends was house sitting for some folks who have a pool. So then we went in the pool and the jacuzzi. And then we actually, after our meeting, watched Below Deck, the reality show, the Bravo reality show about people on super yachts, I guess. All of my friends, it turns out, watched the show except me, but I watched it with them and it was very fun. I think I'm going to join them more often. So it felt like a really summery evening. I hope you're having some summery evenings of your own. So for today, I recently asked my newsletter community if there were any questions that they wanted me to answer on the podcast. And I got a bunch of really good ones that I am excited to share with you over the next weeks and months. Today, I wanted to kick off doing some Q&As by answering a question from Ilona. And Ilona, I apologize. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but if I'm not, please know that I tried. I looked it up on Google. I wanted to make sure I got it right, but apologies if it's not. So Ilona's high-level question was, how do you advise people who are dealing with that general feeling of stuckness? So you've probably noticed that I use the word stuckness a fair amount in my writing and in this podcast. I think it describes how many of us feel in certain seasons of life. I love it because I think it sort of evokes this felt experience of it, but I also know it can be a bit vague. So I was glad that Ilona also elaborated a little bit. She said that her question was about when nothing is wrong per se, but you can feel like you're on a hamster wheel and everything is the same and you can see that you're in a rut, but you don't know how to get out. I love that description so much. So I'm just going to read it again so we all have that context really clear in our minds. So Ilona said, this is about a time when nothing is wrong per se, but you feel like you're on a hamster wheel and everything is the same and you can see you are in a rut, but don't know how to get out. I love that. So I realized in reflecting on this question that on some level, so much of my work with clients is about helping them with issues just like this. But I'm not sure I've ever really answered it quite so directly and explicitly. So thank you, Ilona, for giving me the chance to do that today. So if a client came to me with an issue like this, like the one that Ilona is describing, there's probably two high-level potential paths that I would explore to support them. One path would be to give them a few basic actions to start with. I think there's kind of a handful of actions that if we're not taking, the gunk can kind of build up in our lives a bit, and then we kind of like get stuck in a little bit of a malaise. We kind of get like stuck in the mud of our lives a little bit. So I lay out what I think those actions are in the generally useful prescription episode of my podcast. That's episode 15. It's called A Generally Useful Prescription. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. So if I get a client who comes to me saying this kind of like, I'm stuck, I'm in a rut, I'm on a hamster wheel, I will often explore just starting with one or more of those actions that I know tend to help. And they may either just completely eliminate that hamster wheel feeling, or it may just help them kind of feel more awake and like they have more momentum. And then they may know from there what is needed next. So that is one potential path that I would call a more action first path. There's also a second path, which is the path that I want to talk about today. And that path is really about clarity. Because in my experience, and like I said, I actually get a lot of people who come to me with some variation of this question. On one hand, yes, we are saying out loud, oh, nothing's wrong per se. But what is actually true underneath the surface, underneath what our brain is telling us is, yes, nothing is inherently wrong. Our lives are pretty good on paper, and a lot of the important elements for a good human life, they're there. And if we were looking at a movie of someone else's life, yes, maybe nothing is wrong. All of that is true. And also, this is the important part, something is off for us. Something is wrong for us. And I wonder if you had a reaction in your body when I said that because I had a little bit of reaction in my body when I said it. So I just want to say it again in different words. A lot of times we feel stuck when we're in a rut. Our brains might tell us that nothing is wrong per se, but there is something wrong. There is something that's not working for us as well as we'd like. Or conversely, there is something that we are yearning for. It might be subtle. It might be not life-threatening. We might be able to ignore it for years or even decades, but we will likely continue to feel like we're on that hamster wheel. We're in that rut. We're always feeling stuck if we don't address it. So it's optional, but it's going to come with the side effects of feeling this way. So if someone in that situation made the excellent decision to hire me as their coach, my job would be to help them figure out what opportunities are available to them. What are they wanting to change? It might be something about how they are in the world, like maybe how they spend their time or who they spend their time with, or it might be something more internal, like how they interpret or process the world. And I'm, pretty good at that at this point. This is my profession, right? But if you're on your own today, I wanted to share some of the tools that I think anyone can use to get clear on what they need to do in this kind of situation. So in doing this, I'm going to do a few things. First, I just want to start us off by giving my kind of high-level perspective on this issue, like kind of the theory behind it of where I think these answers are going to come from about what needs to change. And then I'm going to talk very concretely and tactically about some practices and tools and mindsets that will help us get answers. Honestly, it's really just one high-level practice and then 4 ideas for how to do that practice particularly well. So let's get into it. So first, as I said, my perspective, my theory on where these answers about what needs to change in your life are going to come from. So my perspective on this, on unstuckness, is that fundamentally you contain within you the instructions for how to get out. I'm going to say it again. I believe that you contain within you the instructions for how to get out of this stuckness, in a rutness, in the mudness of your life. So that may seem a little annoying for me to say. It might even seem a little cheesy for me to say, but please hear me out. In my experience, people underneath all the layers of confusion and lostness and stuckness and I don't have clarity, we do know how to get out. I know it because I've seen it time and time and time again. But when I say that you contain the instructions for how to get yourself out, I want to set appropriate expectations. Those instructions might arrive to you in the form of a step-by-step, it makes linear sense, and you could explain it to someone at a cocktail party, bulleted list. Occasionally it happens that the instructions for how to get out come in that form, but more often they don't. More often, when those instructions arise, what they will feel like is the process of untangling a knot. And this is the metaphor that I really want to orient us around for this whole podcast. Have you ever untangled like a really messy knot, like a knotted piece of yarn or string or something like that, or a necklace? Necklaces are always getting knotted. The truth is there's not an objective right way to do it. It's not like a step-by-step bulleted list process. It's more a process where your job is to be patient, to show up, to look carefully, and to just kind of start pulling at spots. And if you pull at one spot and it loosens a little bit, and then you pull a little over here, and then it loosens a little more, and that'll kind of reveal a third place to pull. It may not be linear. It may not make logical, quote unquote, sense how you have to pull. It's not a process like that. But if you are patient, if you keep listening, if you keep pulling at threads, you will eventually find your way out. I have seen it happen time and again for so many of my clients. So that's the theory behind all of this. And that leads us to the practical, tactical portion of this podcast. So in terms of practical ideas for you, as I said, I really just have one main idea, and then I'm going to share 4 tips for how to do that really well. So the one big idea from this episode is that you have to truly non-negotiably be building in space to hear yourself. You have to be building in space to connect with yourself, to this deepest self, if we want to call it, for those insights to arise about where to pull on that knotted string or thread or yarn. If you aren't sitting down patiently looking at it from all angles, you're not going to know how to deknot it. That's just not going to be possible. You're not going to be able to untangle it. And most of us in 2024, and also most of the people who find their way to me in this podcast, we're not doing that. We're working, we've got friends and partners and hobbies and kids, and our kids do 4 different sports, and our house needs 6 kinds of repairs. We don't have freaking time or focus to calm down and sit with a messy ball of yarn patiently on a regular basis. And on some level, we might even be convinced that we'll never untangle this ball of yarn. And when we slow down enough to try to untangle it for like 30 seconds, big feelings come up, or we get agitated and jumpy. So we abandon the whole endeavor. But again, if you are not regularly, patiently, calmly looking at that ball of yarn on a regular basis, you are not going to be making progress towards untangling it. You're going to still feel like you are stuck in that rut, stuck in the hamster wheel, because the only way out is to untangle that ball of yarn. And you could get support, but fundamentally you will have to do it. Okay, so let's say that you are bought it. You're like, Katie, I get it. I'm annoyed enough at this feeling of stuckness, this inner rutness, this hamster wheel. How do I do this listening to myself thing practically? So in order to really listen to yourself, you're going to need daily solitude. My favorite definition of solitude comes from this book, which is called Lead Yourself First. It's by 2 guys named Michael Irwin and Raymond Kethledge. And their argument is that we only have true solitude when our mind is isolated from other minds. I'm going to say it again. True solitude occurs when our mind is isolated from other minds. So if you're taking a hike in the mountains and you're listening to a podcast, you are not truly in solitude, in my opinion. If you go get a cabin in the middle of the woods, but you're watching YouTube, you are not truly in solitude, in my opinion. You are being influenced by other minds. But if you're journaling at a local coffee shop, and yes, there's people around you, but you are sitting with yourself, you're connecting with yourself, I think that can be true solitude, even though technically you are around people. But you're not, talking to them, you're just sort of thinking about your things. That still can be solitude. Okay, so let's say that you're bought in, you're like, okay, fine, I need daily solitude time. What do I do during my daily solitude time? So I would say you have a couple options. My top recommendation, it would be to journal. If you have any interest in journaling, I love that as a practice. It's been so helpful for me. And for many, though not all of my clients, it's super useful. Typically, my recommendation is just a free writing practice. Free writing, for those of you who haven't done it, just means that you write about whatever is on your mind. Nothing's off limits. It doesn't have to be something formal like, dear diary, here are the 6 things I did today. And then you list the 6 things. It's just, whatever is on your mind, whatever is on your heart in that particular moment, frustration about whatever, excitement about something else, you just write about it. I particularly love a 3-page writing practice if you have time for it, because it kind of helps you get past your first layer of bullshit. I actually just had a client who I was just talking to him, I think last week, and he had started a journaling practice, which I absolutely loved for him. He was doing a page, and then we talked about maybe he should try doing 2 pages. And he was like, yeah, it was so interesting. At the end of my page, when I was trying to do 2 pages, I would always do a page, and then I would think, I have nothing more to say. And then I'd sit with it for a beat, and then I actually had a bunch more to say. So I just love, inviting yourself to see what more is there. So that's my first recommendation. You could try journaling. I like to do it longhand, but if you can't, for whatever reason, somebody was just emailing to me that she has chronic pain and longhand doesn't work for her, that's fine. Type it, do it in the notes app of your phone if you really have to. But my top recommendation is journaling. I think just it helps you kind of get your thoughts out of your brain. But maybe you hate journaling. You're just not a journaler. Totally fine. It's not a deal breaker for me. I also think that any kind of solitude and just letting your thoughts wander is great. So maybe you take a daily walk and you just don't do anything except think. That's a great practice for folks who are jumpy. And this whole idea of like listening, sitting down seems not good. You could take a daily walk in true solitude. Or if you want to get really juicy with your solitude, you could just sit somewhere. It might be in your backyard. It might be in a park, again, without stimulation or input from other minds. So, you're just like sitting on a park bench by yourself doing nothing for a half hour. I think most of us, if we're not used to that, we might jump out of our skin at first with a practice like that. But I can almost guarantee that you would have a lot of clarity if you did that, for example, every day for about a half hour. So like I said, that's my one big idea that I want to offer you. If you want to get out of that rut, you're going to need information from yourself. You're not going to get information from yourself unless you are regularly connecting with yourself in true solitude, isolated from other minds. That's this big idea of the podcast. But I will say, in my experience, there's a couple of ideas that when I share them with my clients help make a solitude connecting with themselves process even more potent. Sometimes it can give them a couple of these things I'm going to share, help give them more ideas. It kind of supercharges it. And then some of these other ideas just help them avoid sort of common pitfalls. So I want to share all four with you so that you also, have some extra resources to keep in mind as hopefully you take on some kind of solitude practice to help yourself get clarity. Okay, so number one, the first idea that I want you to keep in mind as you are connecting with yourself, as you are waiting for these instructions about how to get out of your stuckness, this hamster wheel, the first idea is that it does not at all matter where the instructions start. It just doesn't. I'm going to say it again. It does not matter where you start. So going back to that knotted ball of yarn metaphor, there's actually not one objectively right way in. So if you're just trying to get started unknotting this ball of yarn, you're just trying to figure out, okay, where's somewhere that I can begin to pull? It might be only one place in the beginning, or there might even be a few spots to start. And on some level, you just got to try one. And that's how you're going to get started. So to bring this back to not the metaphor, to a more concrete example, say you're like journaling in the late mornings, once your kids are at school, before you start work, and suddenly you feel this profound desire to have more cute at-home loungewear. Your first thought might be, oh my gosh, this is so stupid. This is not going to solve anything. But here's the thing. When you do things that feel true for you, even if it's just going to Target or wherever you like to go and buying some more cute at-home loungewear, there is a way in which, on a subtle level, two things happen. First, you will create a subtle sense of momentum. You are moving through the world at a different speed than you were before. And second, when you act on this knowing, this even slight longing, it moves you to a new position in the world. And when you are in a new position in the world, and when you have a new momentum in the world, you will have new insights from this new way of being in the world. I'm going to say that again. When you move at a different momentum, when you are in a new place, you will have new insights because your experience of the world, your way of being in the world, it is different. So that's why I want to start it with this point in terms of my tips and tricks, because I think if we sat on that bench outside and we got information from ourselves that we just wanted to organize our linen closet, or we just wanted to sign up for a jujitsu class, we might think to ourselves, oh my gosh, this is so stupid. This isn't going to solve anything. And so we might ignore that nudge. We might put it to the side. And that is a mistake. That's like refusing to loosen the knot at an obvious spot to loosen the knot. Don't turn down an opportunity to loosen the knot. Loosen it. And to keep going with this kind of knotted ball of yarn metaphor, the strings that you pull on at the beginning to detangle that knot, they're almost guaranteed to not be the things that you pull on as the detangling process continues. The knot is going to change properties as you move on. You're going to get to deeper, more core stuff as you move on. But, my friends, you couldn't get to them without loosening the knot in some other ways at the beginning. So that's my first point. Start anywhere and take impulses to start anywhere seriously. Okay, so the second point that I want you to remember as you try to get some answers from deep within yourself is this. Use your environment to help you get more insights. Our environment is a tool that can be used for so many things, and it's often underutilized, in my opinion. And I will say, I'm going to raise my hand here. I often even underutilize it. It's something that was really first made clear to me when I trained to be a coach, and I have had to really keep reminding myself of it over the months and the years because I can get so focused on your inner life and your thoughts and your body and your feelings and your relationships that I forget that the physical space in which you move and inhabit and find yourself, it just plays a huge role in how you relate to yourself and how insights arise. So, a few ways to play with environment. One of the biggest no-brainer ones, which has probably occurred to you too, is using nature. People's brains just open up in nature in some interesting ways. So you could just, do your journaling in a park, or you could take your walk on a trail. I could almost guarantee that you would have new and frankly often better insights than when you're just at home. A second way to play with your environment is to just at minimum not be in the environment that you're spending 80% of your time. So if you're mostly journaling at your home office desk, even just like going to the coffee shop that you typically go to, but you don't go to most of the time, that's going to be an improvement. And both of these ideas, nature and then just getting yourself somewhere that's not your, 100% typical environment, those are great and they will totally help you. But I will also say, in my opinion, the most powerful way to play with environment, when you've really got a tricky knot to detangle, when you're really trying to get some insights about yourself, is to use novelty. I love putting my clients in physical, environmental spaces where they have never been. It doesn't have to involve flying across the country, though, if you want to do that and you are able to, please totally do that. I think we often have really interesting insights about ourselves while traveling. And that's, again, not an accident. Environment plays a huge role. But just being somewhere new, it can make a huge amount of difference when you are listening to information, even if it's not, across the country new. So maybe it's just a coffee shop that you've never been to in a neighborhood that you don't usually go to. Maybe it's a new to you trail in a part of town that you don't usually go to. But again, it's using novelty. It's using newness. If you are stuck, if you're really in that rut, stuck in the mud, on a hamster wheel, I would recommend at least once a week using novel, new environments during that connecting with yourself practice. I think it will supercharge that process for you. So that's my second tip for how to listen to yourself better, use environment. The third thing that I would recommend if you are really trying to deeply listen to yourself is to spend some portion of that listening time making sure that you are covering a range of important topics. So I suggest at the beginning that you do like a free writing session, or you just sit on a bench or hike and just let your thoughts wander. And that's great. And I definitely, I maintain that is what you're probably going to be doing most of the time. But if you were my client and you were stuck in this, like, I'm on a hamster wheel, I'm in a rut thing, at some point I would make sure that we did a survey of a range of big topics. So I'm just going to list them here. If you were my client, I would ask you to think about how you're feeling and at least really all of these 7 areas at some point over time. 1, work. 2, family. 3, self-care. 4, hobbies. 5, friends. 6, other goals and dreams. Like, is there anything else you're dreaming of? If you could say whatever you wanted. And 7, I would typically ask you, how do you want to feel? Like, do you want to feel relaxed? Do you want to feel grounded? Do you want to feel excited? Do you want to feel sparkling? And you can approach this list in a couple of ways. Like, maybe you just have like one session with yourself where you really, hit all 6. Or maybe you just reflect on one at a time. Like, today I'm really going to think about my friendships. Or another day I'm really going to think about my hobbies. And I wouldn't really invite yourself, especially if you're my client, I would be really inviting you to just like blurt things out. Because, wow, funny things come up when we just blurt things out. And I will also share, as we're doing this, 2 questions that I often ask my clients, which often get us to like deeper answers. So if we were exploring this, like, say we were exploring goals and dreams, number 6, I would ask them 2 questions. I would say, first of all, what would you want if you could have whatever you wanted and no one would be hurt? So I'll say that again. What would you want if you could have whatever you wanted and no one would be hurt? Because often, fears of hurting someone are holding us back. And 2, what are you avoiding admitting that you want? What are you avoiding admitting that you want? So what are you avoiding admitting that you want with your family, for example? So, I will say with this, we can't always have what we want, but I like to, and I'll talk more about this in the next point as well, at least know what we could have. If we could have anything we wanted, we might as well start there. So that's the third thing that I would suggest. As you're trying to listen to yourself about how to get unstuck, take the time at some point to sort of intentionally explore a range of topics, because it's possible that you've been so focused on feeling stuck in your career, for example, that you haven't really been thinking about hobbies or friends or self-care or whatever it is. So just make sure you do that survey of a range of categories. That's my third tip. The fourth thing that I would suggest on this journey is that you do whatever you can to not let worries about implementation derail your clarity. I'm going to say it again. Do whatever you can to not let implementation worries derail your clarity. So before I say more, I just want to define those terms. To me, clarity is about knowing. It's about knowing what you want, knowing what's not working, knowing what needs to change. It's a knowing thing. And the implementation is about action, about making it happen, or even figuring out how to implement, making that plan for how you're going to make it happen. And obviously both are important. So, just to give an example, if what you want is to become Spider-Man when you grow up, as my son does, he literally just told me yesterday morning that he would like to become Spider-Man when you grow up. Obviously, you're going to have to think about implementation. There are going to be some constraints, perhaps constraints of reality that might hinder your implementation there. So thinking about implementation, of course it matters. I am fundamentally practical. I care about implementation. But also, if you jump straight into worrying about implementation, your brain might shut down your ability to get clarity. It will tell you, stop wanting this. It's impossible. And often, I see this a ton with clients, if you get really good clarity first, then implementation can actually be figured out step by step in some way that actually does work for you, that meets the constraints of what you need. So, if you have that good clarity, you're much more likely to be able to find the implementation. And often when I notice that a client is stuck, often what has happened is they've gotten kind of stuck in the morass of worrying about implementation. And if I can just get them to sit in clarity for a bit, maybe for a week, for a month, before worrying about implementation, they will be far happier and usually even more productive and successful. And they'll be more likely to achieve those outcomes that they want. So I will say, originally, as I was prepping this podcast, I prepped this kind of intensely deep dive into some of these kind of subtle ways that worries about implementation can manifest, because sometimes it's happening in ways that are, again, very subtle that we don't expect. I had client examples, but it was going to be this 10 or 15 minute cul-de-sac into the subtle points about clarity versus implementation. And it just felt like it probably deserves its own separate thing. So I saved my notes on that. I'll probably give you a whole podcast on that sometime soon. But for now, I just want to flag that this is just a really common issue that happens a lot. And it will be important for you to notice that if your brain goes to, oh no, implementation is going to be hard, or oh no, implementation is going to be scary, or I'm not ready to implement yet, that may derail your capacity to get clarity. So if it does happen, I would invite you to, number one, notice that it's happened, and number two, invite yourself to just focus on clarity for now. Just sit in clarity for now. You might choose to spend weeks or even months just sitting in knowing, in clarity, without implementing yet. That's fine, actually very normal. And if you do that, if you even just sit in clarity without implementation, I can almost guarantee that you're going to feel less like you're in a rut or stuck or on a hamster wheel, because even just having some clarity, oh my gosh, it feels so much better than not, even if you're not ready to implement yet. So that is my fourth point. Try to distinguish between clarity versus worries about implementation. And if you can, try to focus on clarity first. So that concludes the meat of today's podcast. So I said a lot of things, so I just want to summarize. And I want to start by refreshing all of our memories about Alona's question. She said, how do you advise people who are dealing with this general feeling of stuckness? And for her, stuckness was about when nothing is wrong per se, but you feel like you are on a hamster wheel and everything's the same, and you can see that you're in a rut, but you don't know how to get out. My major point here is that I think that even though Alona says that nothing is wrong per se, something is wrong. It's subtle, likely, and it's not like her whole life is in crisis. And, her life might be just fine for someone else, but for her, something is wrong. There's something she's yearning for more of, or something she's yearning for less of, or something she's just yearning to be different. And all of us, when we find ourselves in seasons like this, we need to find a way to hear information about what is next for us. That information, it's probably not going to come out neat and tidy like a bullet pointed to-do list. It's going to come out kind of weird and disjointed, like detangling a gnarly knot. So you need some ideally daily practice for sitting with yourself in true solitude to be able to hear the instructions for how to get out of this rut. And then again, I had 4 tips for how to listen to ourselves even more effectively in that process. Number 1, remember that you can start anywhere. Anywhere will work. 2, use your environment. Put yourself ideally in spaces where you've never been, using novelty and environment together. 3, make sure that you explore a range of areas within yourself. You might find an opportunity to loosen that knot where you don't expect. And 4, try your best to focus on clarity before worrying about implementation. Worrying too much about implementation, it can block our capacity to get clarity. Again, I do think that most of us within ourselves know how to pull apart that knot. We just need to listen very, very closely and get out of our own way. So Ilona, I hope this is helpful, and everyone else, I hope this is helpful for you too. I know so many of us find ourselves in seasons like this at various times in our lives. And as always, I'm rooting for you. Until next time. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.